and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Miller, and welcome to this month's Fetch First Friday, where Stacy Renfrey and I take a deeper look at what it really means to care for our dogs and ourselves through the Fetch lens: fresh food, energetics, targeted support, curiosity, and holistic health. Today's episode is one that we've felt brewing in our hearts for a long time. It's tender, it's honest, and it just might stir something in you. We're talking about the shadow side of holistic dog care, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of getting it wrong, or the guilt when our dogs get sick, even though we're doing all the right things. We'll explore how spiritual bypassing, influencer culture, and black and white thinking can creep into this space, even with the best intentions. Because here's the truth. Just like conventional care can fall short, holistic care can sometimes harm too, especially when it fuels anxiety, shame, or disconnection from our own intuition. This episode isn't here to judge or to blame. It's here to hold space. It's here to bring compassion and discernment, and to remind you that you don't have to do it all, know it all, or follow every single trend to be a good dog mama. So take a breath, let your shoulders drop, and know that you're not alone on this path. So let's talk about the complexities, the contradictions, and the deeper questions that emerge when we choose to walk a conscious path with our dogs. And before we dive in, we also want to let you know about a new campaign that we're launching this summer called the 81%. It's named after a recent survey that found 81% of dog guardians are using chemical flea and tick treatments preventatively, not because their dogs have fleas or ticks, but because they think they're supposed to. But here's the thing. These chemicals don't actually prevent your dog from picking up parasites. And worse, they're harming not only your dog's health, but the environment too. There's growing media coverage on the risks, but very little is being offered in terms of safe, practical, holistic alternatives. And that's exactly where Fetch steps in. We'll be sharing more in the coming weeks, including resources, interviews, and actions that you can take to protect your dog and the earth. So stay tuned and visit our website, learnfetch.com, for more details. Now let's get into this powerful conversation. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, and welcome to July's episode of Fetch First Friday here on Mystic Dog Mama. It's so exciting to be here.
I know, how is it? We say this every month, but how is it? I've no clue. Like how it's just gone so quick again.
I don't believe it. I think
No,
we're in an alternate universe, something
yeah,
like that. I think
I
that's what's
concur.
happened. We hope that everybody is having a wonderful summer in the Northern Hemisphere and a wonderful winter down in the Southern Hemisphere for our listeners down there. And this month, we're going to talk about something that's been cropping up quite a bit in our personal conversations with one another as we've been reflecting on various things that we're seeing, but also in response to things that are coming up in our Fetch First Light group, in different conversations with other guardians around the kind of the toxic side of holistic dog care. And I don't think it's something that gets spoken about enough in reality. That I think a lot of us go into the kind of holistic world with really good intentions, and we are hoping that it's going to solve a lot of our problems and help us feel more connected to our dogs, more connected to health and well-being, more connected to nature, all of that stuff. But there is a side of it that we see cropping up in various ways that is not so healthy, that we feel like it's important to address so that you can evaluate things for yourself and have a little bit of a kind of like a gut check moment as well about how these things are, these practices, these products, all of that stuff, how it's working for you and your dog, so you can evaluate really what is best for you.
Yeah, on an individual basis, because so much of the stuff that's out there, whether it's online, social media, is so generic. It just takes away from the fact that your dog is an individual and what's working for one isn't going to work for another. And that toxic side can make it feel guilty, can make you feel lots of different emotions about the fact that you're not doing it right. And I think that's what we kind of really wanted to discuss today, that kind of feeling that comes up of not doing it right
Yeah,
because of the pressure to what's the word? The pressure to yeah, the pressure to do it right. There is another word, but my brain has literally just gone,
it's all good. Perimenopause, baby.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, and just to kind of like contextualize this too, that we're not here to critique natural health by any means, but we want to explore what happens when this beautiful path and this with this intention of wellness, like we were saying, in kind of holism, gets hijacked with fear, with guilt, with pressure, like you were saying. And when doing it right, quote unquote, becomes more of a burden instead of a joy. And when I love this, we were sort of talking about when like love turns into kind of like a performance. Right? Like, so these actions become that again are rooted in really beautiful intentions. But when they get overtaken by a lot of our triggers, our shadows, and all that kind of stuff, what happens? And I know that I have certainly felt like that. And I think it's worth sharing here a little bit about our personal stories with this stuff where, I've mentioned on the podcast many, many, many times that my whole journey into this world through Lucky, in reality, I thought I was doing so much of it out of love, but so much of it was out of fear. Like spiraling when getting the diagnosis that he might have issues with his kidneys, and then this attempt to control through food. So yes, the move towards fresh food and learning more about that all was coming from love, but it was cloaked in fear and this idea that if I could just control this, I could then get rid of the problem, right? And I think that's a big part of what people kind of experience. And so I think it's helpful to hear from like my story, from Stacey's story that she'll share in a second too, that is part of the process. But then how do we have those kind of check-in moments to look at, can I reframe this? And is this actually helpful? Because we can get to the place where we are rerooted in a holistic approach that really is coming from a place of love. And as we speak about all the time, the way that intention is just as important as anything you're putting in the bowl.
Yeah.
We know from an energetic perspective that is going to influence our dog's health, our health, how we experience the world. And so it's bringing all this stuff back into balance.
Yeah, and I think for me, particularly with Shadow's journey, it's too long to kind of cover again, but just the overview of the fact that he had an autoimmune condition that was triggered by the L4 vaccination as a puppy, and then eventually having to rehome him in 2020, and the guilt that came with that and the shoulda, woulda, coulda, because I had all that the information that I had, or even that I have now, would have influenced decisions very, very differently back then. But the constant barrage of information and me looking for something, and oh, it could be this, and then it's that, and then it's and just and don't get me wrong, I love being down a rabbit hole, but it felt overwhelming.
Mhm.
And it wasn't that I didn't want to take in that new information, I did, but because I was overwhelmed by the information and fear, because I didn't want to give him up because then I felt like a failure. I didn't want to give him up because I felt I'd failed him. There was so many parts to it that it's only now kind of retrospectively looking back that if I had been able to kind of disengage from some of that to a certain extent and just kind of come back to me and him in our relationship to understand him better, and again some of the microbiome and the other bits and pieces that I would now have done, could things have been different? But that's not necessarily kind of a um guilt trip now, but I can still feel myself get triggered around the L4 vaccination. Like if somebody mentions it, I'm just like, I feel it. And that I think is just part of my journey. And it is probably easing a bit. But when I heard they brought out the L6, that did make me trigger even more. But
Hmm.
but I'm aware of it. And I think that's part of it. I'm aware of it and that I can distance myself from it now. So I don't get caught up too much in that. So
Hmm.
when I work with somebody, and we're talking about vaccines, I just give them the information so that they can go and make that decision for themselves without feeling my fear and my stuff around it. I just give them the information and some articles that are really well written and well rounded around it so that they can make a decision rather than giving them my fear around it and what happened with me.
Yeah.
Some of them will know my story because they've read it or they've seen me speak about it, but it's not driven by my fear.
Right.
It's coming from them and giving them ownership of that information so that they can advocate for their dog in a way that feels good for them without the toxicity creeping in that could come from taking on board some of my stuff around it.
Yeah, exactly. And some of my stuff with Lucky around the kind of guilt thing is also linked into another topic that you and I have talked about here on the podcast, which is the use of flea, tick, and heartworm preventatives,
Yeah.
quote unquote preventatives. They're actually treatments.
Favorite
But
discussion.
yeah, yes. But how but this goes, it's a similar issue to what you faced with Shadow as well, that if I had known that there was a data sheet, if I had known to ask for that data sheet and to read it and to realize that those treatments should not be given to dogs with health conditions, knowing that Lucky was having issues with his kidneys, I had to kind of process once I sort of when I learned about that, when I learned about the effects not on the dog's health, on our health, on the environment of these treatments, and feeling just absolutely awful. I mean, I think we all know that feeling of like that sinking pit in our stomachs, right?
Yep.
And then you're replaying every time you've given it. But
Yep.
I realized that I had to go through a process, and I hope by sharing this that this helps people who are navigating similar kinds of questions, that it wasn't a cold turkey all or nothing kind of thing for me, because at the time we were in Mexico and I bought into the whole fear around heartworm. The flea and tick stuff I could manage in my head. I was like,
Yep.
okay, I'm not as afraid of that, but heartworm I was terrified about, right? And so I still, for a period of time, gave him those treatments because that's what I needed to do to make myself feel like I was doing the right thing by him. I was using a more natural approach in every other way, and I was creating a kind of balanced situation, as balanced as I could. But what switched for me, and I should say first, and I was also blessing those pills that I was giving him. So setting that intention. But there came a point where I no longer felt good giving them, and I had really negative feelings around giving them. And I realized that was the problem. That was
Yeah.
what was going to make it worse, was that I had that negativity. So it isn't either about an all or nothing approach. And we say this quite often when we're having these conversations, but it's finding what works for you and recognizing that your feelings around any decision, whether it's what you're feeding your dog, how you're engaging them in enrichment, your take on vaccines and all of it, so much boils down to how you individually are feeling about it, and making sure that you're coming from a place of love and a place that feels good for you. And that's part of what we're trying to help you with through all of these conversations, is
Yeah.
finding ways to navigate that. What are the questions that you need to ask that will help you make the decision that's right for you? So that's a little bit as well that we're going to be talking about today, is recognizing it's not an all or nothing kind
Yeah.
of situation.
Yeah, there will be potentially a time and a place for everything, antibiotics and vaccinations for, if you're traveling and you've got to have rabies but it's how can what information do you need to make yourself feel comfortable with that? And then what can you do to support your dog afterwards? So reframing it and just putting a different feeling around it can have so much impact because you're not adding the negativity to it
Yeah,
and the guilt because that
exactly.
will energetically impact you and your dog.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So maybe the first thing to kind of dive into, something that I hear a lot, I'll speak for myself, I'm positive you hear this too, but is this illusion of control in holistic pet care, right? Like that we think that if I give my dog all of these superfoods, all of these supplements, the latest and greatest, whatever, I'm going to prevent them from getting any kind of illness, right? My dog just won't get sick. Or one of my favorite ones, if I balance everything correctly and I use the spreadsheet and it tells me that I've got everything balanced, then I'm good. I've done everything right. I've given my dog every bit of nutrition that they need. And those things, yeah, they're not true. They're
Mm.
not true. You can take every quote unquote right action, and your dog can still get sick. Your dog can still develop cancer. Your dog can still develop kidney disease. Your dog can still develop a yeast overgrowth. All of that stuff. And I think it's important to recognize that it is an illusion of control. But what taking the holistic approach is doing that may be different from the conventional allopathic approach is you are looking at prevention.
Mhm.
What is the best you can do? So how do I best set my dog up for success? But it's also, and I think this is key, is looking at the whole dog and the whole person and the whole environment as one ecosystem.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
yeah, and I think and looking at it as an invitation, if those things do come up, an invitation to how can we learn differently? How can we look at this differently? What question? And again, coming back to the what questions can I ask to navigate this in a different way rather than just coming from a place of fear. I get it. There's always going to be an element of it if you get a diagnosis like that, but it isn't an all or nothing. There are so many ways of looking at it and so many different types of using conventional and holistic treatments alongside together. And that's okay. That's beautiful because it's whatever works for your dog and for you. So it's not being all or nothing.
Yeah.
Because I think that and I think that's what can happen. And I've seen it that it's either the allopathic camp or the kind of holistic camp, and there's not much room for kind of the crossover. It's all or nothing because I've got control if I'm doing it holistically, and I've got control if I'm doing it allopathically. Because, but actually, that's an illusion. You haven't ever really got control. It's about just kind of surrendering to that learning and that moment where you can actually, what can I take from that? How can I do this differently? And we were having that conversation, or we were listening to that conversation last night about they were talking about different uh oh no, it's gone.
Organizational leadership.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
was about when we were saying about when you made the comment about whether we choose from love or it's an opportunity to choose is it coming from a place of love or not? And again, it applies to that as well. Are we coming from this from a place of fear or are we coming at this of a place of love? Because again, energetically, that's going to have a very different impact on what happens
Totally.
potentially, you know, because
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah, but I think it even ties into and you obviously would be able to speak much better to this than I could, not having any children. But I think it's like also how, as parents, you want to protect your child, and it's a fine line between wrapping them in cotton
yeah,
wool or bubble wrap, right? Wanting to protect them from everything and actually allowing them to live and to experience
yeah,
and to accept that the circumstances are what they are. And how do you come from a place of love within that, not necessarily with like, I've got to get rid of this in order to find
yeah.
joy and happiness and health and all of that.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, with my eldest coming up to 18 now, it's just kind of like now this is when I've just got to hope that everything, the kind of foundations that I've laid and the relationship that we have just catapults him into adulthood, you know, and that at 18, yes, he's still living here, but what control do I actually have?
Yeah. Yeah,
You know, and
exactly.
that's when I have to trust. So
Right.
it switches that feeling. And
Right.
I'm very aware of it right now.
But exactly, exactly. And I think too something that's helpful to kind of remember again, like from this perspective of, we bring in the spiritual aspects here on Mystic Dog Mama of looking at our dogs come into our lives for a reason and they have their own journeys as well that we're walking the path alongside one another, but they're not here to be perfect or to be preserved. And that actually this ties into as well the conversation that we had about what it means to honor a carnivore through their diet and how one of the things that we experience in our culture is just this total fear of death. And I mentioned how Beth Bigler, who I interviewed for the podcast, who is a pet loss grief counselor, if you've not listened to her episode,
Mm,
it's
yeah.
definitely worth listening to it, especially if you're processing grief of any kind. With your dog or just in your life. But she made such a poignant comment that I bring up quite often because it hit me like a ton of bricks that the only thing in our culture that we are open to losing is weight, right? We
So
we are
true though,
not
right?
yeah, and so we do everything we can to try to avoid losing. And we actually in that process lose so much. And I'm not downplaying the grief and the pain and all of that of a pet that's struggling, illness, loss, all. I'm completely,
Yeah.
completely I understand that. And this is part of the experience that we signed up for as humans and our dog signed up for as well. And is there a way for us to reframe what's going on? Not saying you don't try to help your dog get better or anything like
Yeah.
that, but is there a way of like viewing it differently that actually it becomes a portal for us? It becomes an
Yeah.
initiation, and whatever experience we're going through with them, it is an initiation and it's not seen as a failure, which I think a lot of us feel if we're not quote unquote getting it right. If our dog still gets sick or
Yeah.
anything like that, we feel like we failed. And I would invite you to question that and see that as perhaps that's not actually true.
Yeah, and I think that was what was me with Shadow, that I felt it was my fault because I had taken him to the vet, and I had said yes to having the L4, I had said yes to the flea and tick, and that the guilt that came with that was huge, and then the guilt that came with letting him go, like to be rehomed. So at both ends of that spectrum, there was so much guilt involved. It's taken time to kind of heal from that and
Mhm.
kind of reflect back on it differently. But if I could have looked at it differently in the moment, could there have been a different outcome? I don't know. And if I had known about those things beforehand, again, but it's only afterwards that I started looking into that stuff. So,
Right.
but was that just meant to be my journey with Shadow? Because Hozo wouldn't have started. We wouldn't be
Exactly.
doing fetch. I wouldn't have gone on that journey that I've gone on if it wasn't for Shadow having those issues and that happening. It's made me who I am now.
Mhm.
So I thank him now, and when I write about him, or when I talk about him, I thank that experience for where it's brought me, rather than it being about, oh my God, the guilt. Yeah,
Mhm.
it was there, but in a way, what a beautiful lesson that was, and what a beautiful gift he gave me. So
Mhm.
I need to honor that rather than feel the guilt. So I think that's a real reflection in coming away from that, not feeling toxic about it or feeling that I didn't do good enough and that I made a mistake and all of the things that, we're talking about, because I can reframe it.
Right.
And that's a shift in that conversation and that feeling for me, definitely.
Yeah. And I also think, speaking of a shift too, is thinking about like wellness isn't actually a guarantee of health. And I think that's a big thing that, again, that speaks to the illusion of control within holistic care. But
Mhm.
it's really about the quality of your relationship. It's about being in the moment. It's about being in a place of love and not trying to control the outcome and thinking that a particular outcome guarantees us success or love or happiness or whatever. And I think it's catching ourselves in those moments. I mean, I still get caught up in it, right? So
Yeah,
I'm not preaching as somebody who's like solve this. This is a very human thing, but I
yeah,
think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough in the holistic space. And I think there are a lot of us in the holistic space that we do carry because we tend to be people who are really empathic and empathetic and like have massive hearts and all of that. And we carry such a weight, particularly when it comes to our dogs. So we just wanted to kind of create the space, hold the space
yeah.
for these kinds of conversations to kind of give an opportunity to reevaluate and recognize too that we're not alone in walking this journey, but there are other ways of seeing what we're experiencing.
And the more you talk to other like dog guardians, the more you realize that no one has had an easy journey for one way or another. It's not like this. I know you get like the idyllic pictures of you just walking in the forest with your dog, or you just going to the beach with your dog and everything's beautiful. Yeah, there will be moments like that, but that's not every day life. So how can we embrace that? How can we kind of take that on board and go, well, we'll learn as we go, and this is our journey together, like you alluded to earlier. Like this is our journey together. What will come from it? What lessons? What growth will we get from these experiences? And that's really beautiful as a reframe, I
Yeah,
think.
it is. It
Yeah.
is. It's beautiful. But in kind of like a follow on from the toxic side of this illusion of control, we talk about with one another quite a bit, and I think this is like the perfect time to bring this up too, the influencer effect and superfood paralysis, as we kind of have labeled it, because there's a lot of noise. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people come to us or they come into the holistic space and they are just completely overwhelmed with all of the things that you quote
Yeah.
unquote should do. The
Should.
latest and greatest superfood, the
Yeah.
need to chop a vegetable and leave it to sit for 90 minutes before you give it to your dog because of the cancer boost or The anti-cancer properties are boosted.
Yeah.
I mean, just all of it. And literally, if you followed every single thing that you're told to do, your dog would be eating 400 pounds of food a day.
Yeah. And you'd never leave
You,
the house because you'd
you'd
be
never.
constantly prepping food.
No, and if you listen to us with the whole fetch process too, you will know that we are big advocates for doing what is right for your dog, and what is right for another dog is probably not going to be right for your dog too. So you can actually compound problems by
Yeah.
throwing everything in the kitchen sink at
Yeah.
your dog without an understanding of why
Why?
you're doing it, right? And in response to your individual
Yeah.
dog. So yeah, I think that's a big thing that exists within the holistic space is the influencer effect and yeah, definitely superfood paralysis.
Yeah, and it does just become overwhelming. And I've seen it on consults, I'm sure you have too, on the intake forms where, you get these amazing dog guardians that are so wanting to support their dog with whatever condition that they're struggling with. And then all of a sudden you see the intake form and the supplements, and it's like it's War and Peace. You're like, whoa, hang on, like how, okay. And then when you actually, then when, like we do an intake form first and then we will look at it. And then when we meet with them, we go through it in detail and then you kind of dig into the why. And they're like, well, I read that was good for this. And then I saw that this one was good for that. And then I saw the, and I'm like, right, we need to strip it right back to basics right now because at the moment we don't know what's working. We don't know what's working. We need to work with the dog in front of us. And that's the problem with the influencer thing because again, it's a generic thing. Like, yes, that is some that the and a lot of the information that comes with it, is correct, but is that applicable to your dog? Possibly not. So
Exactly.
we need to get more aware of thinking of just saying, that's great information. I wonder if that would work for my dog, and kind of not just jumping on a bandwagon
Exactly.
because we should do it and because that person is speaking with some authority. And it's not to take away from their authority, but it's just to say that it's information. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily applicable for your dog. And learning to unpick the connection to just because it's somebody saying it that it's Bible essentially, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think that's a huge thing that we are both real proponents of when it comes to fetch as well, is that C, curiosity,
Yeah.
in and marrying that up with the T for targeted, of looking at asking questions and you becoming your dog's advocate. And so I think that's a crucial part that's missing so much in all the conversations that I see online. And especially, we were talking about this last night around the whole issue with like balanced and complete and understanding that that is actually a marketing term.
Yeah.
Where does that come? So understanding where do these terms come from and how are they shaping the way that you're thinking about caring for your dog? And this I'm just gonna say like this misplaced trust in spreadsheets. Like there is no, first of all, okay, let me take a step back because I'm very passionate about this, clearly.
I'd never have guessed.
No, I know. But I want to say there is no one right way to
Yeah.
feed a dog. And let's be honest, nobody actually knows what is optimal for a dog. Like, nobody actually knows what is optimal for humans.
Yep.
Every dog is an individual. Every human is an individual. What works for one is not necessarily going to work for another. These guidelines, I've done past episodes on Mystic Dog Mama, and I can point to them again if you're interested in this, specifically like the ones with Kay Stewart from the
Yeah.
Feed Real Institute and Dr. Neil Lowe, where we talk about where these guidelines, AFCO, FEDIAF, and RC came from and what the purpose is. Long story short, just to give you a quick overview, it's based upon commercial feeding. The idea is that there had to be some regulation, assuming that a pet parent who was buying a bag of kibble was going to just be feeding that one bag of kibble, probably for the dog's entire life, right? But making sure that if that's all the dog was fed, that the dog was getting at least the minimum
Minimum.
that they needed to survive. That's what it's based upon, right?
And that's on a spreadsheet, isn't
And
it, as
that's on
well?
a
That's on
spreadsheet.
a spreadsheet. That just hits targets on a spreadsheet. That doesn't actually mean what makes the bowl and what is bioavailable to the dog at the end of the day. So again, it's just numbers.
It's just numbers.
Yeah.
When we start to translate that, and I see that happening a lot with a variety of different formulators, let me say this too. Formulating does have its place.
Hmm.
However, if you are using it just to feel that sense of control and to alleviate any guilt that you might be getting it wrong, that's where it becomes problematic. And one of the big issues that I have with a lot of the formulators that are out there, besides the fact that they're just taking is generic data that has come from the USDA's, which is
Yeah.
the US, United States Department of Agriculture's bank of resources about, in theory, how many calories are in a particular food, how many grams of protein are in a particular thing, how much vitamin E is in a particular
Yeah.
thing, right? A lot of those spreadsheets include things that are not actually good for dogs. For example, butter.
It's an interesting one when I see that appear in formulators, but yeah.
So So it worries me when people start using formulators without understanding how to use formulators and also understanding starting from the basis of what does a dog actually
Yeah.
need. Because that formulator, if you put butter in, it will
Will
just
make it
dry,
complete.
it will make it complete. But does that mean that your dog should be eating butter? Absolutely, categorically not. So
Yeah.
you need to still be educated. It can be a support tool. And for certain therapeutic situations, absolutely it has
Yeah.
its time and place. But for the general pet parent
Yeah.
wanting to use it to try to alleviate any kind of concerns, that to me is not the go-to without having a better understanding of, again, how to use it, why you would be adding something in, what role is that playing in the dog's diet, all of that kind of stuff.
I think I found I don't use one anymore, but when I was using one, the reason I found it kind of helpful in that thing is it's just because it started to build that picture for me in my head of what do they need? Okay, so what whole food sources can we make sure we've got a vitamin E source? How do we make sure we've got some zinc going in? How do we make sure we've got some magnesium going in? And then when you start like repeating a recipe and starting to, then you go, oh, okay, there's actually a pattern here. Then, and that it really helped my understanding and then me feel more comfortable with the fact that, okay, as long as we're offering a rotation of these types of products so that I know that those things are going into the dog's diet and why they're going into their diet. So I'm using kelp because that's the iodine and it just gives you the confidence. So I think that they, like you said, it could be a tool if you know what you're plugging in the first place. But if you're just plugging things in and moving things around to get it to hit numbers, there's no critical thinking in that. It's just trying to make it fit at the other end. When actually we need to think about why it's going in. And that's the bit that I feel, and I think I can speak for you as well, that it's that component that's massively missing, the why, that kind of education component. Why and what does a dog need?
Right.
Because once you've got that, it's really easy. It's not
Yeah.
difficult,
Yeah.
and you don't need that security, I suppose, of a
Yeah.
formula.
But that being said, we'll pose a question to you guys as listeners. What do you struggle with when it comes to having the confidence to feed your dog
Mm,
fresh food? Because we are going to be putting together some more free resources and other tools to help support you. So we want to make sure that we're actually giving you something that would be helpful. Let us know. You can either leave a comment or get in touch. You can actually email us at hello@learnfetch.com. I'll put that in the show notes as well. But let us know what you're struggling with, what would be helpful for you
mm.
as we start to build resources to make you feel more confident on your fresh feeding journey.
Yeah, that education component, like
Yeah.
what information do you need? Like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And I guess off the back of that too, as another thing that we sort of noted in terms of the holistic side of, or the toxic side of holistic care, is the dog mama guilt and decision fatigue and how those two are completely intertwined. Like, should I do raw or gently cooked? How do I know? Which supplements are essential? Did I do the detox correctly? What have I missed? And, it's the more you start asking those questions, the more it can feel so overwhelming,
Yeah,
particularly if you're doing all this because your dog has a health challenge.
yeah. And I've spoken to the Guardians that have said to me, I'm up at 1 a.m. still just Googling and but Googling not with any kind of sense of direction, because you just end up going down and oh that fits and then that, oh but hang on, it could be a bit of that and maybe I need to use this and it is that overwhelm and they literally come to you just, I'm exhausted from thinking about this. And then, their friend says, oh, check out this advert. And also I was speaking to somebody else about this recently, that when you start looking at things and the way the cookies work and the way that your feed will then get kind of manufactured, I can't think of the word, but the way that your feed then cultivates it to show you products that are linked to the things you've been searching for. And that sends you down another rabbit hole. And you are almost bombarded by, no, this one's going to fix it. No, this one's going to fix it. This one's going to fix it. So that overwhelm becomes so real and
Mhm.
people are just exhausted. And they've probably spent thousands potentially at this point as well. Because, and they've got a supplement graveyard. They're just overwhelmed and they don't know where to go next.
Yeah.
And that to me is the toxic side of it because it just perpetuates the overwhelm.
It
It
perpetuates,
constantly.
yeah, it perpetuates the overwhelm and it perpetuates the guilt and the shame that's associated with that. And I think it's important to underpin as well that the underneath that guilt and shame is a lot of love.
Yeah.
You know, your decisions we get, your decisions are coming from the right place, but it's just where do you go with all of this stuff? Which is also why we built the Fetch framework to help people navigate it because we get it. We totally get that this is so overwhelming, but when you have a safe structure, repeatable structure that you can keep running your questions through,
Yeah.
that makes it a lot easier. And it also makes it so that you have more confidence with
Mm.
whatever decision you're making, and also confidence in asking other professionals the right questions or to be able to answer to a professional why you've made a particular
Yeah.
decision. Right. And I think that's part of it too that gets missed out.
Yeah, because you've started to join the dots for your dog. So that, and then if you do need to speak to a vet or a osteo or chiro or anybody, you've got that information to give them and you feel confident in why you've done that because you've got something you can say, well, I did this research and then I read this and this seemed to, and it's working so far for him. I know I might need to change it. Or, it just gives you a little bit of structure to thinking things through.
Yeah,
It's a little
100%.
roadmap and a compass, isn't it? It's
It
yeah,
is. Exactly. Exactly. And I think that this also links to the next thing that we kind of want to cover in terms of topics. It's like how do we walk that fine line between advocating for our pets, advocating for our dogs, and not becoming aggressive
yeah,
when we're talking to any kind of a professional and becoming defensive and also not being able to hear anything. Because I think one of the other really ugly things that I see, I know you see it as well in the holistic space, is a lot of vet bashing.
yeah,
And I think that's highly unfair.
yeah,
And I think we need to recognize that the system is broken.
yeah,
The overall system is broken. It's same in the human healthcare. But vets go into this because they love animals. We have to remember that.
yeah,
And I think it's also important to remember that it's a relationship with your vet. So if you are not in a right relationship with that person or you need a different type of person, then find another vet. That's totally your call to be able to find another vet. Shop around for a vet. Ask the questions. So we've got a guide. I will tell you about it as we kind of wrap this up. But we've put a guide together that will help you as well with think through what are some of the particular questions that you would find most helpful to be asking a vet to ascertain whether or not they are the right vet for you, so that you can cultivate a relationship that's based upon trust. Would you
yeah.
agree?
100%. And of I've obviously got a fair bit of vet trauma in my background because of what happened with Shadow and just the not feeling listened to and me trying to advocate and it kind of hitting a brick wall. And that's not all of them. It was just part, again, it's part of the system. And that because the condition he had was so rare, it was, everybody was kind of just pulling at straws, like, is this going to work? Is that going to work? But because Ted hasn't seen a conventional vet for I think I'd figured it out. It was like 7 years he hadn't seen a conventional vet. And weirdly enough, well, not weirdly, but last week he had to go and see a conventional vet. Now, he was registered at one about 10 minutes down the road, but that was where the shadow trauma was. They were the ones that managed him when he came out of the RVC. And I was like, I can't go back there. I don't want to go back there with Ted. So luckily enough, we've had a new independent one open up near us. So I decided, right, clean slate. We're going to start afresh. I'm going to go and build a relationship with this new. They're independent, so they're not, they haven't got the kind of corporate thing coming in above them. I'd heard really good things about them from various different people, and I thought, right, I'm going in without um to agitate or get, I'm not going in with that. I'm going in as me to advocate for Ted, and because he'd hurt his shoulder and I just needed him to get checked over, and I wanted to get him some anti-inflammatories because I knew he was in pain. Now, for Ted not for Ted not, one, not to have a walk for a day, like unheard of, and two, to be visibly uncomfortable like that because of how he was holding his shoulder. He needed something. I'd take a paracetamol, I'd take it, but I'd spoken to a friend who's really well versed in pain medications. I was prepped. I knew which active ingredient was the one that, after speaking with her and figuring out who Ted was and which one would be best for him, I'd spoken to her. I'd built up this picture already in my head and I'd got it. Spoke to the vet. The vet actually asked me, which type of pain relief are you looking for? Like I was bowled away. I was like, oh my God, you're actually asking me. And I was like, right, I found the right vet now. And I know that I could go back to her confidently and not be stressed or feel anxious. So it is so important about finding that right vet so that you can
Absolutely.
advocate for your dog in that moment. And she was brilliant. She listened to everything. She was like, oh, you've got an osteopath for him. Great. I'll send my notes over to her later. That's fine. I'll just send out. So they're working together as a team, so all of that. But that, for me, I think that's actually been quite healing because of everything that happened with Shadow. There feels like there's a bit of a release and of that part of the journey with him, that I can work alongside a conventional vet. There is space in my life now.
Yeah.
So, but it was a challenge because I
Mhm.
had to go and face some of those fears of where I had been up against feeling like, and it's not that I ever thought the vets were wrong, but I just wanted to feel listened to. And I never felt that before, whereas now I did feel listened to. And that was such a refreshing change and so wonderful. So I'm really thankful.
That's
Really,
amazing.
really.
Did you actually feed that back to her? Did you say
No, but
thank
I
you?
keep meaning to. It's on a list, all of those things. But that I can see from their Facebook page and the stuff that they're putting out, they are trying to be different and showing that they're actually listening to guardians and stuff. So I think it's a real positive step in the right direction, and it seems to be a really lovely practice. So I'm
Yeah.
really pleased. So I'm going to be, everyone locally to me, I'm going to be recommending them to them. So yeah,
Perfect.
yeah, it's great. So it is about finding the right vet. And I know,
Yeah.
but I appreciate that's not easy for everyone because some people are so limited by the ones that they've got, or they've only got big corporate chains. But again, if you can use our guide and look at the questions, so that, and even if you just need to ground yourself to a little meditation before you go in, so energetically you're not going in on the defensive, can
Yes.
be huge.
Oh,
How are you
yes.
feeling when you go into that appointment? If you're stressed, that it's only going to fuel the whole thing. But if you can go in kind of grounded and prepared, like I was, I'd got my information, I knew what, I'd done it, I'd done that research, and I felt so much more confident going into it. And that shifted the whole energy. So it'd be interesting to know what the consult would have gone like if I hadn't have been in that position. Do you know, like, you know,
But I think that's huge. I think you pointed out something that we have complete control over that we forget
that's the
about.
control we do have. Like
Exactly.
arts, yeah, 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And our expectations and also our openness. I mean, and think about how you receive when somebody comes at you like they're ready for a battle. That's, so you have to put yourself in the vet's position as well of how do we actually create a conversation that is about collaboration for this dog? And again, what are the questions that you need to ask for finding the right vet? But also before you go into a situation like so for like you did before going in with Ted, getting a list of not just the medications, but what are the questions that you wanted to have answered, right? If you can write them down
yeah,
before you go to the vet, so you've got them there and you can make sure that you've asked them and you write down the answers so that when you come away, because I think this is another thing, and actually in my conversation with Dr. Lise Hansen on vaccinations, she recommends this as well, that when you go into a situation with a vet, especially in the case like this where there might be something wrong, you can be so overwhelmed that you don't even hear
yeah.
what they're saying to you, and you walk out there and you're like,
What happened?
yeah, what happened? What am I supposed to do? So where you do have control is exactly like we're saying, over your energy and your expectations, making sure you have a list of your questions that you want answered. Write the answers down while you're there and clarify with your vet. And something else that you and I were talking about just before we started recording as well was just reminding one another and listeners too, unless it's like an actual emergency situation, you don't generally have to make a decision right there and then.
Yep.
So giving yourself grace, my word of the year, and giving, I love it too, and giving yourself the time and space and being able to say, for example, that's great. Can I have the data sheet on that drug or or whatever it is, right? Can I go away and think about this? And maybe you need to get a second opinion. That's also doable. And I know that we don't want to have to keep going to the vets. I get that it's expensive. I get that it can be frustrating. I get that our dogs don't necessarily like it. But it's figuring out what you need to do in order for you to feel like you're making the best decision possible. And this touches on as well, not being afraid of going to the vets because there is a time and place to go to a vet. So the holistic thing, like the number of times I've seen in different groups, what can I give this dog for this? And you're like, oh my God, get that dog to a
Don't
vet.
need the vet. Yeah.
Colloidal silver is not going to get rid of everything. Like, let's just put that out there, right? Like,
And Manuka honey. That's not, I mean, they're great, don't get me wrong, but there are times, like we said, antibiotics may be needed. Ted needed an anti-inflammatory, because he was in pain. I could see that he was really uncomfortable, and it's not him, you know. And for a dog that's as active and who he is, to is it is not good to see him in that place. So he
right.
had been seeing a vet, but it was just a holistic vet where he has his annual MOT and his acupuncture and stuff. So the expectation going into that appointment is very different, because I can have all these conversations with her and it's absolutely fine. She's just like, okay, yeah, that's it, you know. And because I track stuff for him as well, which I think is such an important part. And I know that we both feel we've both had consults where there's some resistance to tracking, I think, isn't there? Because again, it feels like it's adding to the overwhelm. And but in reality, it can be such an incredible tool, can't it? When you go to speak to professionals and as you start to build a team around your dog, when you've got data, when you've got real information to be able to go, well, this happened on a Tuesday and they'd been fed that, and that happened on a Friday and we walked there. That can be the nuggets that help people like us and osteos and chiros and the vets start to put together the bigger picture. And it it is a little bit frustrating when you get that resistance, but I completely understand where it comes from, because they are already overwhelmed. They're already at that point of like, I can't do any more. And it's almost like they just want to hand the dog over to us and be like, can you just fix it? Can you just tell me what I need to do? But unfortunately, it's never quite as simple as that, because there's so many nuances and different things that happen within that story. So it's, it's, yeah,
It's that, yes. And
and
also, yeah, and, you know, going back to the T for targeted in
yeah,
fetch, I was having a conversation with somebody recently about like itching and saying, I can't tell you what to do for this until we figure out what the cause of the itching is, because certain things are going to need certain things, right? Or you might need to cut something out if it's one thing or another. So when you do have that tracking and you're starting to see the pattern, then we can really cut through the overwhelm. That is how we cut through the
yeah,
overwhelm. And we say, right, ask your vet for this test. We're going to confirm whether or not it's this. And then this is what we do
yeah,
for us, it would be from a nutrition side of things to support this. You'll also want to talk to your vet or your chiro or your osteo or whatever and do da 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 da. Then you get on top of it.
yeah.
So doing
It
the tracking
shortcuts the overwhelm, doesn't it? Yeah.
totally shortcuts the overwhelm. But this also goes into something, this is maybe a little bit of a hard truth that I know I've had to look at for myself. So I'm not pointing fingers here. This is something that I've had to deal with as well. But how often do we argue for our limitations when it comes to our dog's care and other things? I'm just using the dog's care as the
Yeah, yeah.
example of what we're talking about right now. And in reality, this goes back to what the invitation of what's going on with our dogs actually is. When we argue for our limitations, we're essentially saying that we can't, that we
Yeah.
don't believe in ourselves
We
enough.
don't trust
We
ourselves.
don't trust ourselves.
Hmm.
So it's an invitation to start trusting ourselves,
Yeah.
even on a really small level. And I get that it's hard. And I get that it's a practice that it is a practice. You have to
Yeah.
keep doing it and you have to like try little bits, right? It's figuring out how yeah, what your approach to working with those limitations is. But
Mhm.
sometimes it can be that really hard mirror that's held up where we have to look at, okay, what is this really asking of me, not just of the situation, but of me in this? Because in reality, everything is part of our spiritual journey. Everything is an
Yeah.
invitation.
Yeah. And it is. When people start to see that, if you reframe it for people in a certain way, and then all of a sudden you see the light bulb go, you're like, oh, okay. But again, sometimes you might not even realize. And I mean, I'm definitely know that I'm one for doing it. And then when I kind of like look back, I go, oh, I really was arguing for my limitation in that moment. That I didn't have to come at it from that place. Where was it coming from? Either fear, overwhelm, any of those other things, and then actually recognizing it. Because once you recognize it, you can do something about it. But I think because we're so conditioned to just take the easy route, because that's, it is a pill, it is just one thing that you're going to have to do to fix your dog. And because if it doesn't happen with that, then everything else becomes harder, doesn't it? You don't
Mhm.
want to have to do the other work, but unfortunately that is part of the work, doing the work.
It is. And I think it's a big part of why our dogs come into our lives. Like I say all the time on the podcast, they are mirrors for us in so many ways, and they really are inviting us to walk the spiritual path with them. And so when anything is coming up, recognizing that in reality, everything is an opportunity.
Yep.
And when you start to see it as an opportunity, it doesn't necessarily mean that you like that particular opportunity, right? Like I'm not sugarcoating this. I'm not Pollyannaing this. Like I get it. And these are things that I actively face too. But I think I have gotten quicker
Yeah.
in sort of getting out of the spiral or the sort of like poor me trap of it all, or arguing for my limitations. Like, I can't do that. That's just too hard. Or no, I don't want to, whatever I throw out there. I very quickly come back to, okay, so what is the opportunity here? And when I start to frame it like that, that makes it a little bit
Yeah.
easier to actually be able to dive into it and then take the right next step with confidence. Not that the thing that I'm doing is right, right? It's still not about this right and wrong binary, but it's looking at I can take a next step. So if
Yeah,
that's
and even
helpful.
with the tracking, even tracking how that makes you feel, like when they're itching, how does that make you feel? When they walked there and they got, they seem to show some reactivity, how did that make you feel? Because that helps you pick up your patterns within that situation as well, because you might not realize that actually on that day when they showed some reactivity, you'd had a really stressful phone call before you went on the walk that really triggered you for whatever reason. You were in a rush to get out because then you had a meeting or any of those things. That actually tracking can be really beautiful for both of you. It's
Yeah,
not just for the dog, it's for your role within that. And again, it's not about blaming, but it's just starting to understand
just
and to
understand.
see the bigger picture. And it's not just the dog. There will be all these other emotions and energies flowing through the house. And it's when you can actually see them. But again, it's kind of taking that mask off can be really scary sometimes, and kind of go, oh, do I want to peep over there? Ooh, that's a bit
Yeah.
much. But
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's also why we created Fetch First Light as a Facebook group
yeah,
as well, as that kind of support space. Because again, I started Mystic Dog Mama as the podcast, as the community that I was looking for that I didn't have when I was going through like the thick of it with Lucky. And you also created Hozo in an attempt to support people through community as well. And that's certainly why we've come together to create Fetch, that this is not a path to be walked alone. And I think it's helpful when you see other people dealing with similar kinds of things and you have a safe space where you can be heard and not judged, but we will be able to support you with giving you using the fetch framework in a sense, like reflecting that back to you to help you find your own power. We both talk about how we hate the word empower because
yeah,
it sounds like someone else is giving you the power,
yeah. You didn't have it in the first place, but you did. But
but you did, and we're here to remind you that you do. You do have it, but we're helping. We heard in that the talk we were listening to last night, somebody referred to like basically our role in this situation is you are the light with the like a lamp, right? But your lamp has gotten dirty and you can't really see it. So we're here to help clean the glass so you can see your own light,
yeah,
see your
exactly.
own truth, right? And help you make decisions that are right for you. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, lost, confused, unheard, like you're the only one in your family, in your community that's trying to to have this holistic life path with your dog, come and join us in Fetch First Light. It's a free group. We're there to help support you. It's full of other like-hearted guardians just like you. So that's an opportunity as a resource to help support you on your journey. And you just search Fetch First Light on Facebook. I will also leave the link to that in the show notes as well, so you can click and join from there.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. But I thought it might be helpful too, as we sort of come to a close with this. Well, I should first ask you, is there anything else that on those topics that we missed that
No,
you've
I
got?
don't think, I think we did pretty well with that. I think we did well. Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
But maybe a little micro practice that you could do with your dog that might, I don't know, feel good as you're going through these things is consider placing a hand on your dog, and maybe place a hand on your own heart as well, and take 3 deep breaths together and whisper a thank you to your dog and to yourself, not for what you've done, but for who they are and for who you are and how you're walking this path together. And just see how that feels. As a reminder that this is why we're doing everything in the first place. And it's something I have to remind myself when I get caught up in everything
Yeah.
and then turn and look at Lucky and think, I really have to remember that he's the reason I'm doing all this. And so, not from a place of guilt, but as a place of, like we were saying, a compass point, coming back to that compass point. What is my true north? What is leading this? Where am I trying to go with this? So, hopefully that supports you guys too.
Sorry, that's Ted coughing in the background.
Can't hear him. It's
Uh,
good. He's like, yes, yes, mom.
yes.
But like we said, so come join us in Fetch First Light. Share this episode too with anyone that you think might be struggling with some of this stuff, because we want it to be a support for them as well. And keep an eye out. We will have a link in the show notes to our PDF, Bridging the Gap Confident Vet Conversations for Holistic Dog Guardians. It's a free PDF that you can download and help support you in both choosing a vet and actually how you navigate having a positive and impactful and, yeah, proactive relationship with your vet.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, and I'll put some of the tips and tricks in from from my recent experience because it has been really positive. So that's, it's a great step. And I think if you can feel like that going into the vets, it's going to have a very different feel from if you're going in with a anxious, angry
Absolutely.
vibe. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that is it from me. Is it for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah. I mean, there's a 900 million other parts to that, but, I
Yeah.
think we've done a very good summary of what's been going on.
Good. Well, and guys, if you have anything you want to add to kind of our list, if there's anything we missed out of the discussion on the kind of toxic sides of the holistic vet care space and what you've encountered and actually how you've managed a lot of this stuff, we'd love to hear from you. You can either reach out, leave a comment, reach out at hello@learnfetch.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at learn.fetch and leave a comment there or send us a direct message. Or you can also reach me on Mystic Dog Mama, at Mystic Dog Mama on Instagram, and I will add your responses to all of this as well, and we can just get a conversation started.
You love a conversation.
We do love a conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Stacy, for being here
Thank you.
too.
We'll see you in August, people.
Yeah, see you next month.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining Stacy and me for this month's Fetch First Friday episode. We hope this conversation brought you some clarity, relief, and reassurance. We'd love to hear what landed most for you. Feel free to reach out on Instagram at learn.fetch or drop us an email at hello@learnfetch.com. If you haven't already, don't forget to download your free Fetch Starter Pack, a beautiful bundle of resources including our go-to bone broth recipe, tips on choosing supplements, and our newest guide, Bridging the Gap, Confident Vet Conversations for Holistic Dog Guardians. You can grab it at learnfetch.com under the Starter Pack tab. And if you're feeling the call to live more rhythmically with the seasons, our brand new Fetch Summer Almanac is now available. Rooted in traditional Chinese medicine, it offers cooling foods, heart-centered rituals, and simple practices to help you and your dog move through summer with more ease, joy, and connection. It's just £7 and available as a downloadable PDF on our website. And don't forget, the 81% campaign is officially live. If you care about your dog's health and the health of the planet, we'd love for you to join us in spreading the word. You can find everything that we've mentioned today, including links to our free Facebook group, our resources, and the campaign, right in the show notes and on our website, learnfetch.com. Until next time, take a deep breath, trust your inner knowing, and give your dog a cuddle from us. You're doing better than you think.